Happy late birthday, and guess we are in our pajamas. Bye.
Spider-Man! Ham! Who's the mouse?
What?
I'm going to say happy Mandalorian Day.
Okay, you can tell them that.
Happy, it's Mr. My Mandalorian birthday.
Your birthday was not today.
It was at Mimi and Grandma's totes.
Yes.
And nobody was born that.
Nobody was born that day.
Who was sick?
Everybody.
So,
All right. Can you tell them bye?
Except Van.
Can you tell them bye?
Look at my shoulder.
Yeah, we see your shoulder. Can you tell them bye?
Look at my Spider-Man
Yes,
shirt.
they see your Spider-Man shirt. Can you say happy Sunday? Can you say happy Sunday?
Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Okay. Today, I'm going to split this devotional up into two parts because we are on the last person in our book of the series on the Cast of the Cross. We're going to talk about Peter, but there's a lot to Peter. So I really didn't want to do like a 30-minute devotional, and I wasn't planning on splitting this up into 2 weeks. But I think to give it justice, I need to split it up into 2 weeks. So this week we're going to talk about things we know about Peter, things Peter did, and then next week we're going to talk about things Jesus did for Peter and the same things that he's doing for us. And we're going to show the similarities between Peter and us, Jesus and Peter, and Jesus and us. If that makes sense. And there's 7 of those things, and so I don't really want to rush through them or we're going to miss the point of it. So tonight might be a little bit shorter, but it was kind of like in the middle because if I did it all, it was going to be super long. If I split it into 2, today was going to be kind of short. So I figured you all might like it to be a little on the shorter side. So we're going to begin our last lesson on the Cast for the Cross, and we will finish it up next week. And so like I said, we're talking about Peter. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about some things we know about Peter. We know that Peter was Jesus's right-hand man. He was always with Jesus. We know Peter was in Jesus's inner circle. He was very close. We know Peter is always mentioned first in the list of the apostles. Whenever you're reading the Bible, whenever you see Peter's name with other people, Peter is always first. Typically, that means he's the most important. He was someone that Jesus cared about a lot. He did play a major role in Jesus' life. He's mentioned first. Another thing is his name means rock. We see that in the Bible when you change it to Cephas, and Cephas means rock. And then we also see the importance of rock in Matthew 16 through 19. And it says, Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." So, the rock, you are Peter, and on this rock, it was on Peter's great confession that the church was built upon. And Peter is promised to have the keys of the kingdom. So this verse tells here, Peter is important. He is the rock. What is the rock? The rock is where he's going to build his church. And what about this church? It is the church. The gates of hell are not going to prevail against it. Very, very important. And speaking of the church, we also know Peter used these key words, these keys, or the keys that we talked about in these verses, by preaching the first gospel sermon on Pentecost. How do we know that? We read Acts 2. Acts 2 tells us that Peter preached it preached the first sermon on Pentecost. So all these things that we have mentioned so far, Peter sounds to be like a pretty good person, right? He was a right-hand man, and usually your right-hand man's a pretty good person. He was in Jesus' inner circle, so he must have been a pretty good friend. He's mentioned first, so he's pretty important. We know his name means rock. He preached the first sermon. He was very close. So all in all, if that is all we had to base Peter on, he's a good person. We want to be like Peter. He seems to be an upstanding person, seems to be very close to Jesus, but there's always a but. But we know he had his downfalls. Peter was human. Peter was not perfect. Peter had problems. Peter had downfalls. So I want to look at two of those. We're going to look at two of Peter's major faults, two that are recorded that we know, that show us that Peter is human. That Peter, even though he was super close to Jesus, he made mistakes. So when we're going over these two things, I want us to put ourselves as Peter. Peter is us. The first thing, like we said, Peter has been with Jesus. Best friend, inner circle. I won't say best friend, that's my words. Good friend to Jesus, in his inner circle, always there. Where wasn't he? When it was time for Jesus to be crucified, Peter was not there. Now think about that. In my words, I'm going to say, just for my mind, Peter was Jesus' best friend. When you're being killed, when you are facing something horrible, who is typically there? Family, your best friend. Who do you call? Your best friend. This is the time Jesus needs Peter, and Peter was as far away as he could get. Matthew 26:56 says, "But all this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples left him and fled." So was Peter the only one who left? No, they all did. But Peter left. Peter left. And Peter was the most important. He was the closest. He was his right-hand man. He was important. And he left him. He left his friend. He did not watch him be crucified. He did not follow him to the crucifixion. That's Peter's first fault. He's been with Jesus during all this time, and when Jesus needs him the most, he bails. The second thing, we know Peter left Jesus. He didn't want nothing to do with this crucifixion, any part of it. But and I think this second part shows a little bit more how close Peter was to Jesus, that still inquiring mind wanted to know what was really going on. Because Matthew 26:75, we're going to read that in a minute, we see that Peter was spying on Jesus during his trial, and what happened? He was recognized. And this person comes up and they ask him, "Do you know this man?" And Peter, no. And they didn't ask him once, not twice, 3 times. And did Peter ever admit knowing this man? Even though he was seen with them and they said they saw Peter with Jesus, he denied them. No. I do not know this man. I do not know who you're talking about. So that is Peter's second fault, is he denied Jesus. Again, he's supposed to be his closest person, and we aren't there when he's crucified, and now we're denying. He's in trouble, and your best friend is denying that he even knows you. So Matthew 26:75, "And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, 'Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times.' And he went out and wept bitterly." He wept bitterly. He knew what he did was wrong. Again, everything that is happening, the prophets said were going to happen. It happened, and now Peter realizes, remember we talk about each week that light bulb moment? This is Peter's light bulb moment. The rooster crows, and it's, oh, what did I just do? I just committed the worst sin that ever happened, that could ever happen on this earth. I just did it. And what did Peter do? He cried. He cried. He knew he let his friend down. And the thing I want to get out of this devotional, because like I said, this one's going to be short because next week's going to be a little longer because I want to talk about more in detail things of Peter, even though Peter did all of this, yes, he was a great person, but he left Jesus when Jesus needed him the most. He denied Jesus not once, not twice, but 3 times. Jesus was still on Peter's side. And just like Peter, Jesus is there for us when we desert him. When we go far away, when we leave the church, when we decide that we're done, we don't believe in Jesus, we're done with the Bible, whatever it is in our life, when we leave, Jesus never leaves us. We leave him, he doesn't leave us. How many of us are like Peter and we seem like a good friend? We're all the perfect things, like we talked about Peter at the beginning. But then when the going gets tough, when we have the crucified moments in our life, we bail out and we're not the friend we should be. How many of us are like Peter? But even if we are like Peter, Jesus is still there for us. He can and he will continue to use us. And that's where we're going to stop. So we've looked at the good of Peter. Then we saw 2 major things that Peter did that he shouldn't have done. But it shows that he was human. He shows he had faults. But we also see Jesus kept using him. Next week, we're going to talk about some things that Jesus did for Peter. And these things that Jesus did, he also does for us. And I thought they were pretty neat. There's just 2 things, but they all have, the first part has 7 parts to it. So, we're going to talk about that. We're going to see how even more we're a Peter. And all the things Jesus did for Peter, he still does for us today. Gives us the same chances that he gave Peter. So I wanted to introduce that today. I promise next week we will finish up Peter. And I hope everyone has a great week. Thank you always for listening. And we will see you all here next week.